Morning all. New details have emerged this morning about the next stage of our fight against coronavirus. But it comes alongside a fresh warning of just when it would be sensible to start lifting those lockdown restrictions. Well, let's take a quick look at the morning's main developments. Starting with this, Sky News understands that the government is drawing up plans for a programme of nationwide surge testing. Meanwhile, scientists tracking the spread of COVID variants have warned against lifting lockdown too soon. Dr. Niall Paterson of Liverpool University told Sky News that case numbers should be down to the low thousands each day before restrictions are lifted, or those numbers will rise again. And as the vaccine rollout rumbles on, the head of the Vaccines Task Force has told Sky News that all adults could have had both of their jabs by September or even August if we carry on at the current rate.
The supply we're going to get will take us to the position where we can vaccinate as many people as the UK wants to vaccinate.
That's an incredible achievement. So the Vaccine Task Force knows that it can secure supply within roughly what time frame every adult 2 jabs of a coronavirus vaccine?
Well, I think we're probably talking August sort of time, August, September time, all done. Maybe sooner if we need to.
We really need that headroom of getting cases down before we can really take our foot off the brake. Otherwise, we'll just, I think, end up with cases rising again and starting to get to a place where we don't want to be.
Meanwhile, one London borough hardest hit by COVID-19 has raised concerns about test and trace capacity as we ease lockdown. Our political correspondent Kate McCann reports.
Hello, my name's Kerry. I'm from the Newham Council. I'm from the local contact tracing team.
Newham has suffered more COVID cases than any other London borough. Now the council is turning things around. Staff like Kerry are leading the local test and trace effort alongside the national scheme.
When you make that call and on the end of the line is someone who's either really, really ill or has lost a relative, very quickly, very recently, you go into, your brain obviously is very sad for them and obviously you go into empathy straight away, but then immediately that makes you want to help them more.
Do you think you could save lives?
Definitely. I think we do save lives already and I think we could save more.
But as lockdown lifts, test and trace will come under increasing pressure to keep infections low, and that means difficult choices.
Coming on the back of significant years of local government austerity and a whole range of tough choices already facing councils, add on that the hit that the pandemic has meant for councils in terms of the wide range of financial impact that it's had. And then on top of that, you add all of these additional things, which we absolutely want to do. We want to do everything we can to protect our communities. But it's really clear that the more resources that local authorities have, the more we're able to do in this space.
Along with the push to get more people tested, here they've started paying for hotels so people from overcrowded homes can isolate away from family. And they've applied to the government for funding to expand the tracing service 7 days a week.
Newham has been harder hit than most other London boroughs, so asymptomatic testing centres like this one are absolutely essential to stop the spread. But when you couple this work with staffing vaccination centres, surge testing and now expanding test and trace, it's not hard to understand why leaders are calling for more help.
Ministers have announced more funding, but Labour says it isn't enough.
I think local authorities have really become the fourth emergency service through this pandemic. They've moved heaven and earth to support communities and they've done a fantastic job. But without the appropriate funding from national government, they simply don't have the resources to do the job they want to do and that we need them to do.
So often in this pandemic, there's been tension over whether local or national is best. Now, both councils and ministers are on the same page on test and trace. They can see the value in what places like Newham are doing. It's funding, not ambition, which will limit how much of a difference they can make. Kate McCann, Sky News.
And as you can see, Kate joins us in the studio. Morning, Kate. Look, as your report and indeed the government have often made clear, test and trace is at the heart of our response to COVID-19. But with eyes on the horizon, papers this morning, and indeed we've confirmed this ourselves, that there are plans afoot for, a surge in mass testing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think this is the next stage. We're going to start to see more of this from Monday, that the Prime Minister is going to set out how we move out of lockdown slowly. And a huge part, as you say, will be test and trace. They're going to be absolutely central to this. And some of that will be councils, and that's what that report was talking about there. The other part will be sending these rapid lateral flow tests to our homes and to our workplaces. And that's going to enable people to know if they are asymptomatic. Now, when Boris Johnson is asked about one of the regrets that he's had over this pandemic, what he always goes back to is, I wish I'd known that asymptomatic spread of the disease was widespread in the early stages. They know it now, and they're going to try and counter it. And this testing will be a huge part of that. Hundreds of thousands of us will get these tests around our, as I say, homes and workplaces. If you don't have symptoms, you'll take one. If you have COVID, you'll know about it, you'll isolate. And that will be key to stopping clusters from spreading and ending up in another lockdown.
More from you after we've spoken to the Minister. For now, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's take a closer look, as we always do, at those latest coronavirus figures for the UK. 10,625 new COVID cases have been confirmed, and a further 799 people have died within 28 days of testing positive. Now, that brings the UK total to 118,195. 15.6 million first doses of the vaccine have been administered. Just a reminder, the Foreign Secretary will be joining us on the programme in just a few minutes' time, so stick with us for that. But also coming up on the show, well, with the government discussing whether to roll out potential vaccine passports, we'll be looking at the risks and the benefits of such a scheme at 8:30. At 7:45, we'll be speaking to the Children's Commissioner for England, Anne Longfield, on her last day in the role, as she calls on the government to put children centre stage of the Prime Minister's promise to build back better from coronavirus. And at 9:45, I'll be talking to one of the survivors of the 1972 Andes plane crash about his remarkable story, staying alive for 72 days in the harshest of conditions. Well, let's take you through a few of the other stories making news this morning. 1 in 6 people in England could be on an NHS waiting list by April due to strains on the health service. The think tank Reform said that patients waiting a year or more, the number of patients, I should say, waiting a year or more has risen by more than 12,000% since the start of the coronavirus pandemic. NHS directors say the service will face a mammoth task to tackle backlogs if the predictions are correct. A judge has ruled that a civil claim brought by the family of Harry Dunn against his alleged killer should go ahead in the United States. The teenager died in 2019 following a collision between his motorbike and Anne Sakula's car in Northamptonshire. She was charged with causing the teenager's death by dangerous driving, but claimed immunity as the wife of an American diplomat and returned to the United States.
The parents are overwhelmed this evening. And obviously our thoughts are with Harry, who died 18 months ago. And it's difficult to talk about a victory or a celebration, but this is a massive step towards the parents getting some semblance of justice.
The NSPCC says there's been a sharp rise in the number of people reporting children being put at risk because of parental alcohol or drug abuse during the pandemic. Data shows the number of reports has increased by 66% since last March, with more than 38 being logged every day. Donald Trump has launched a blistering attack on the Senate's leading Republican and his previous close ally, Mitch McConnell. The now Senate Minority Leader had accused Mr. Trump of being morally and practically responsible for the Capitol riots, although he did vote to acquit him at the impeachment trial. In a statement, the former US President Donald Trump said this: Mitch is a dour, sullen and unsmiling political hack with a lack of wisdom, skill and personality, adding that if Republican senators stayed with him, Mr. Trump believes they will not win again. Next, the case of a missing princess and her secret video diary. The Foreign Office says it's concerned about a Dubai princess who says she's being held hostage in her own country. In secretly recorded videos, Princess Latifa claims she's been detained, having been kidnapped, drugged and taken back to Dubai in 2018 after attempting to escape. Her father, Dubai's billionaire ruler, has previously denied the allegations. saying she was tricked into leaving Dubai by criminals. Just a warning that the following report from Sky's Sanya Burgess does contain some flash photography.
I'm in a villa. I'm a hostage, and this villa has been converted into a jail. All the windows are barred shut.
For 3 years, the world has heard nothing from Princess Latifa, the daughter of Dubai's billionaire ruler, Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. But Sky News can now reveal Princess Latifa's story. We sent her questions and she replied using a smartphone smuggled to her in what she says is a royal villa in Dubai.
I'm doing this video from a bathroom because it's the only room with the door I can lock.
Latifa's father is the Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates. Regularly seen with heads of state, including the Queen, he has horse racing and property assets in the UK. But Latifa, one of her sisters and 2 ex-wives have all claimed the Sheikh abused them. He denies this. 3 years ago, the princess says she tried to escape with friend Tina Yauhiainen.
I believe that Latifa has wanted to be free all her life, and I'm not satisfied until Latifa is allowed to travel to a country of her choice and get the freedom that she's always wanted.
They made plans, with Latifa seen here practicing in the palace pool. In February 2018, they drove from downtown Dubai into Oman. From Muscat, they took a small boat, then jet skis, to a waiting yacht and set sail for Goa. But just miles from the coast of India and what they believed was safety, armed Indian commandos boarded.
I was prepared for anything. You know, I'm used to much worse and I'm prepared for anything. I was prepared to even lose my life for freedom.
Latifa says she was forcibly taken back to Dubai.
I was tied, I was up against a lot of people with weapons.
Beaten and tranquilized.
He took out the needle and he injected me in my arm.
Her father says Latifa was tricked into escaping by criminals who wanted money, and returning her to Dubai was a rescue mission, and that she is safe and well. But much of Latifa's account has been accepted by a British judge in a High Court case involving the Sheikh and his former wife, Princess Haya bint Al Hussein. The Sheikh rejected the findings and said the judgment inevitably tells only one side of the story. Pictures were released 9 months after the escape, showing the princess with former UN Human Rights Chief Mary Robinson, who says she was duped into taking part in the photos. Friend David Haig, who was also charged and detained in the UAE over fraud allegations, says he is hoping the videos will encourage the UN and others to act.
We want politicians and former politicians and world leaders and celebrities and so-called influencers, all the people that go to Dubai and the UAE and promote that country to wake up and see what the reality is. This is a country that is, literally, people will be on those beaches in Dubai a few hundred meters away from where Latifa is essentially in solitary confinement, a hostage.
Sky News agreed to run these videos when Latifa wanted them to be made public. But 9 months ago, my secret communication with the princess stopped. We don't know why or where she is now.
I don't know what can happen to me and how long this will last.
The United Arab Emirates has not responded to a request for comment. Sanya Burgess, Sky News.
I'm doing this.
And we're joined once again on the programme by the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab. Mr Raab, it's been a while since we last spoke, so I do hope you've been well. I wonder if we might start with this, the case of the missing Princess Latifa. What is the British government's position on this?
Well, look, you can only watch the footage that you've just shown, Niall, and see that there's very distressing pictures, a very difficult case, and I think it is concerning. We always raise human rights issues with all of our partners, including the UAE. There's no particular British locus in this case, but we are concerned by this. And I noticed that, and we've seen that the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights will be following up on what we've seen, and we'll be watching and monitoring that very closely indeed.
From what you're saying, it certainly feels like we would not be in a position, as yet at least, to talk about sanctions, to talk about perhaps inviting the ambassador in for a chat.
We always raise these issues with all of our partners across the piece, including in the Middle East, where we have to have some of these difficult conversations. I've always raised human rights issues. I always do, with foreign ministers, with the ambassadors. And I think the right thing, given what the United Nations has said, is to follow very closely. And we're obviously always supportive of the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights. And I think that's the proper course right now, to follow those developments quite closely.
Of course, we do have a relatively close relationship with the United Arab Emirates. There is trade, of course. There are security concerns. One understands that this issue is not going to immediately change the nature of our relationship. But one has to say, given the fact we had a UK court ruling back in 2019 that not just the princess has been abducted, her sister as well, Sheikha Samsa, was kidnapped on British soil. I mean, on the basis that at least one of his children looks to have been kidnapped here, don't we have more of a responsibility to get involved?
Well, certainly in terms of the private law claim that went through the UK courts, obviously we not only respect but would expect compliance with any and everything that it's decided, to the extent we can control that, of course. And any criminal matters rightly for the police, and they should investigate them without fear or favour.
Would you, Mr. Raab, support seeing some kind of proof of life of Princess Latifa from UAE?
I think, given what we've just seen, I think people would just at a human level want to see that she's alive and well. Of course, I think that's a natural instinct, and we would certainly welcome that.
I wonder if we might move on to the announcement that you're making today, and of course the UK and its role on the Security Council. There are opportunities for us to push a number of agendas. Tell us just a little bit, though, about the ceasefires in conflict zones. I mean, certainly we need to get the world vaccinated for the world to get back to normal, and that clearly will have to involve areas in which there is conflict. How would that work, though?
So the UK is stepping up to the plate. We've got the presidency of the UN Security Council, and you're right, there's two things we're particularly focused on. The first is trying to get a COVID vaccine ceasefire, because with the new vaccines, which is a big change since last year when this resolution was pushed by the French with our support, we've got an opportunity to get to some of the most vulnerable around the world. And one of the things that I've seen as Foreign Secretary is the compound impact abroad in the most vulnerable countries for the most vulnerable people of three things: famine, conflict, and COVID. And so if we can, through the UN Security Council, which is the international community's top body for passing rules and making statements around international law and what's required, if we can just see a window of opportunity to reach those really vulnerable people in those terribly afflicted countries, I think we'll be doing a lot of good. And that's what Global Britain's all about. And that's what we're going to be trying to secure, on top of the support for the equitable distribution of vaccines, which we're already leading the way in terms of the COVAX AMC mechanism. We've provided £500 million. That will produce 1 billion doses, again, for some of the most vulnerable people around the world. There's the two things we want out of this debate later on today, which I'll be chairing.
Indeed. Of course, we are ahead of much of the rest of the world, not just in getting the vaccination into people, but in terms of the purchasing of the vaccine. We had a considerable degree of foresight when it came to hedging our bets, such as it was, in terms of who we ordered from. We've clearly got, on order at very least, more vaccine than we could ever use. At what point do we start to think seriously about redistributing that? I mean, we heard from the Vaccines Minister at the weekend, potentially not until every adult in the UK has had a vaccine.
So first of all, we're already trying to support those most vulnerable countries, the low and middle income countries around the world. And the right way that the international community can respond, and which we're leading on, is the COVAX AMC mechanism, because you put money in, it secures the doses. The COVAX AMC arrangement has supply chains with the different vaccine suppliers. So that's the first thing. It's the most important thing. It is going to be the clarion call that I make in the UN Security Council later today. It's true as well, if we've got excess supply in due course, when we know not just the amount of vaccines we need, but the timing, we would then want to think again whether there's an additional route of support that we might be able to provide. We're not there yet, but we're already stepping up to the plate in the way I described by putting money in and using our convening power to get other countries to match it. And that's the way we'll support the most vulnerable countries, the most vulnerable people around the world, and show that we need a global solution to a global pandemic.
It is slightly away from your brief, but I'm sure it's something that you know about. The letters that will be being sent out to around about, well, just less than 2 million people, telling them that they need to shield. It all seems the product of this algorithm that is driving at least part of our pandemic response. Can you just explain exactly why we have found ourselves in this situation, what the metrics that this algorithm has identified are, and how soon we might think we can be in contact with these 2 million people?
So obviously we want to make sure our response to the pandemic is updated as we learn more about the virus and also about the vaccines. Oxford, and it's called the Q-COVID program, has, through data that it has modelled, found that there is a particular additional vulnerability in relation to certain compound factors. So it's things like age, sex, body mass index, all put together. And it's 1.7 million who we think are at greater risk. About half of those will already have had the vaccine or are on course to have the vaccine under the current rollout. So there'll be another around, again, half of that number who we're contacting to say, first of all, you're now a priority for the vaccine. We want to make sure they get it as soon as possible. And secondly, we're urging them to and advising them to safeguard until the end of March with all of the support on things like statutory sick pay, guaranteed delivery of supermarket and medicines that will come with that. I think it's the right thing, the responsible thing to do, to make sure when we learn about people who are more vulnerable to the virus, that we do everything we can to provide them extra support. That's the approach, and we will be notifying them immediately as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I'm sure that they will be grateful when they're contacted. But just in terms of how we come out of this phase of COVID-19, there seems to be a very strong indication that, well, of course, you have always maintained testing and tracing is at the heart of getting us out of this. But it feels like we are about to embark upon a programme of mass testing around the country to try and keep on top of this as the vaccine continues to be rolled out. Can you just speak a little about that?
We learned previously in places like Liverpool and other areas in the north, the value, particularly when you've got a spike, of testing done at scale and at pace, particularly with the new lateral flow testing. But as we roll out the vaccine and as we start to think, and the PM will set out the roadmap forward on Monday, so on the 22nd of February, and he'll set out the details. And as we get the feedback, the data from the impact of the vaccine, the 2 or 3 things that are going to be really important if we're to ease out of lockdown safely and responsibly are, yes, of course, the vaccine, the therapeutics, which aren't much talked about, but the drugs that help take some of the fatalities out of those that contract the virus, but also this lateral flow testing, being able to do it at scale, at pace, so that when you do have upticks of the virus, we can come down on it like a ton of bricks and make sure, and it's only one part of the strategic jigsaw, if you like, but make sure we can come down on it like a ton of bricks. I said there's a range of measures, but testing and rapid lateral flow testing is a key part of that.
And Minister, again, slightly away from your brief, but I'm sure it's something that you will have a view on. We keep hearing, in terms of the quarantine hotel scheme, we keep hearing that passengers from red list countries are on the plane, once they arrive in the airport, all the way, in fact, to the border checks, are being allowed to mingle with passengers from non-red list countries. What are we going to do to sort that out?
Well, we've got a series of measures in place already. You have to have a COVID test to get on a flight. In relation to those coming from the red list countries, obviously, if they're Brits, we've got to get them safely back home. And what we've devised is the most safe and effective mechanism that we can. We know that the numbers of people travelling have come right down. We have the hotels and the hotel capacity to make sure that they can then quarantine at home for 10 days, sorry, not at home, at a government commissioned hotel in safer conditions. It's only one of the lines of defence, and obviously we're struggling with this balance as we have right the way through, and we're striking the right balance between robust measures to safeguard the vaccine from coming in, but also looking after British nationals who we need to cater for and take care of. We think we've got the right balance. I think the system is working reasonably well, but as I said, it's only one of the safeguards, only one of the lines of defence to prevent either variations from the vaccine or people unwittingly carrying the vaccine coming back into the UK at this critical moment.
Dominic Raab, great to have you on the show this morning. Thanks for being with us. Well, let's get a little bit more there on what we heard from the Foreign Secretary about a report on Princess Latifa. Dominic Raab telling us that he would, in fact, support some form of proof of life being demonstrated. Our diplomatic editor, Dominic Waghorn, joins us on the programme. Morning, Dominic. I mean, it is a tricky situation for the Foreign Secretary, for the British government, of course, because of the ties between the United Kingdom and the United Arab Emirates. But as we heard from the Foreign Secretary, look, when you see those videos, it almost compels a need to see proof of life, the proof of life of the princess.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that this is an awkward case for the British government because, as you say, the ties between the UK and the UAE are very close, have economic ties, trading ties, tourism ties, military and intelligence ties, and also the fact that this is the friendship between the Queen and Sheikh Mohammed Al Maktoum because of their shared love of horse racing. Despite that, the UK has been commenting on this case, and I think what the Foreign Secretary said to you is probably the most we've heard for a long time from the UK government about the case of missing Princess Latifa, saying that these were distressing pictures. It was a very difficult case, he said, very concerning. In terms of whether sanctions are likely to be imposed or considered by the British government, or whether you asked whether the ambassador might be called in about this, he reverted to what we often hear from the British government about sensitive cases, which is that they always raise human rights issues with allies and governments. Lawyers and campaigners are going to be putting legal pressure on the British government to try and encourage it to impose sanctions on individuals in the UAE, as they have against Saudi officials, for instance. So we have to see how that plays out. But no sign that the Foreign Secretary is prepared to go there in terms of your questioning along those lines, Neil. I think the British position is that there's no, as he said, particular locus in this case for the UK, although it has to be said that Princess Latifa's sister, Shamsa, disappeared from the streets of Cambridge 20 years ago, a UK city, of course, and Sheikh Mohammed denies any involvement in her abduction. But a British judge did rule a year or so ago that he continues, that the Sheikh continues to maintain a regime whereby both of these two young women, both princesses, are deprived of their liberty, albeit within family accommodation in Dubai. But I think the most interesting thing was as you were saying there, your question as to whether he would like to see proof of life, and Dominic Raab saying on a human level, people would like to see that she is alive and well. So despite these close ties between the two countries, these claims and the publicity around them are undoubtedly straining those ties. And I think to talk to the Foreign Secretary to draw him out on that, talking on a human level about this desire he would like to see and others would like to see, to at least prove that Princess Latifa is alive and well, that will put greater pressure on the relationship between the UK and the United Arab Emirates.
Dominic, many thanks indeed. As we were hearing just a few moments ago from the Foreign Secretary, he's calling for ceasefires in conflict zones so that people can be vaccinated against COVID-19. Sky's Africa correspondent John Sparks joining us from Johannesburg this morning. Good to see you, John. I wonder what you make of this plan from the Foreign Secretary, of course, all very closely linked to the position that we're currently holding on the UN Security Council.
Yeah, good morning, Neil. Yeah, the Foreign Secretary there saying that the British government is stepping up to the plate. What I think he's doing, the government is doing, is recognising the brutal reality of this pandemic, that no one is safe until everyone is safe, until everybody has had a vaccine. But I have to say, a UN resolution calling for ceasefires in troubled spots so these ceasefires can aid in the distribution of vaccines is not really worth very much, because IS-linked groups in Central Africa, Nigeria, Mozambique, they're not going to pay much attention to that. That is another reality, I'm afraid. But his call for a concerted action on a more equal distribution of vaccines around the world, I think that is important, and that issue really does need a lot more attention right now. We have just come back from Mozambique. We did a trip there for 10 days, and I can tell you that nobody in that country has had a vaccine, not even frontline health workers. Well, in the UK, you've got middle-aged people now getting their first jab. You've got more than 15 million people that have had a jab. So the disparity there is absolutely huge, and something has to be done about that. People in public health workers in Mozambique were telling us that it could take 5 years or more to get the entire population in that country inoculated because of the financial difficulties, because of the huge logistical difficulties. Their reality is different, and at the moment, countries like Mozambique, vaccines are aspirational.
John, thanks very much. Still to come on the show this morning, we'll be looking at if a potential vaccine passport scheme could actually work. That's next. Welcome back. The government has said it is looking at whether coronavirus immunity passports may be needed in the future for international travel. But the Prime Minister has stressed that he currently has no plans to introduce a scheme for domestic activities. Pleased to say we can speak now to Professor Sir Jonathan Montgomery, who specialises in healthcare law and indeed has been looking at the matter of vaccine passports. Professor, great to have you on the programme this morning. Given where we are in terms of the vaccination rollout, given what we know about vaccine efficacy and transmissibility, vaccine passports, a good idea or not?
Well, this certainly isn't the right time to be implementing them. The logic of a vaccine passport would work if having a vaccine reduces the risk you present to other people of passing on the virus. And we don't know that at the moment. We know that the vaccine reduces the risk of the person vaccinated getting ill, so it's good for them. But it doesn't make sense to think about passports unless it also stops them passing on the virus to other people. So this is certainly not the time to be implementing it, but it is very reasonable to be thinking about the pros and cons.
Just on that point, though, is this perhaps not an occasion on which we would be best advised to kind of cross our fingers and hope that the vaccines have some effect on transmissibility, and on the basis of that, perhaps there could be I understand the distinction that you're making, but if there remains the possibility that transmission is affected, is it not possible for us to at least start the early stages of a vaccine passport scheme?
Well, I think the public health case is almost the opposite of that, because if it were the case that we were lulled into a false sense of security, thought it was safe to do things, and then it turned out that we spread the virus, then that would be much worse than not going down that track. People who are interested in this are primarily interested because it may help us open up the economy. And that, of course, is something which is really important to get everybody back to work and their lives in place. But the real gain in that is getting widespread vaccination. And we don't need the passport system for that. We need to focus on getting everybody vaccinated.
Just in terms of the legal aspect of all of this, I don't know if you share my view, but it somewhat feels, given what we have heard from ministers about domestic vaccine passports and their reluctance to see them used for services in the UK, the private sector is undoubtedly going to have some effect. And it may well be that the government is somewhat sitting back to let a legal test case go to the High Court and all the way to the Supreme Court.
I think it would be silly to wait for it to go all through the court process, but they may well be looking to see which areas of the market want to use these passports. The most obvious ones at the moment seem to be international travel and the opening up of leisure venues. On international travel, the key will be a global agreement, because it's important that every country recognises the vaccinations from others. And we've seen the debates from, for example, France
about their approach to the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So there may be a lot of people who don't get this recognition, but at the global level, the World Health Organization is looking at this, and that must be the right vehicle to explore it. Domestically, we should be worried about who's going to be denied access as much as worried about the hope for a passport, because most of us will not get vaccinated for a while.
Absent the government legislating against the private sector acting in this fashion, is there any legal barrier to employers insisting that their employees, or even perhaps new employees coming into the company, have had a vaccine?
So it isn't, I think, lawful for employers to require current employees to have a vaccine. It may be lawful for them to put into their recruitment processes the desire that people are vaccinated. From an employer's point of view, it is reasonable to try and make sure that people are safe to come to work. And of course, the vaccine helps with that. I will be much safer coming to work if I've been vaccinated because I'm unlikely to get seriously ill. But if the argument is that their customers are safer, then we're back to where we started, that that's only going to be true if they're less likely to pass the virus on. And we just don't know that at present. So we might find ourselves with a discrimination problem, that employers are unjustifiably discriminating against certain groups of people, the unvaccinated. And of course, they tend also to be more likely to be particular age groups in the current vaccine program, and also some groups who are a bit more hesitant about taking the vaccine because they need to be reassured that it's safe. And if we found ourselves systematically excluding some of those groups, then employers might find that they are engaged in unlawful discrimination, but that's untested as yet.
Professor Montgomery, great to have you on the show this morning. Thanks for your expertise.
Thank you.
Now, Texas has issued a state of emergency after 4 million people were left without electricity because of a snowstorm. The freezing weather swept across southern US states, with tens of millions more facing severe weather warnings, many seeking refuge and warmth in emergency shelters. Sky's Adam Parsons reports now from Texas.
In Grapevine, they are relying on emergency generators for electricity. Like many towns in Texas, the extreme weather has caused a wave of power outages. Many people are cold and helpless. They come to this impromptu emergency shelter, set up in a leisure centre. Here we meet Charles, tired but relieved.
I don't think I could have stayed in there all night, so I think I did the right thing by coming up into this warming station here. At least it let me live another day. You know,
think you would have died if you'd stayed at home?
Probably so, yeah.
In another room, Cherie and her daughter Zoe. After a night sleeping here, they've managed to find a hotel to move to.
It's been, rough, but they're doing what they can and they've been phenomenal.
But not everyone is so lucky. Hotel rooms are rare and expensive in Texas now. We're with Belinda as she tries to find somewhere warm for the night.
Do you have any rooms available tomorrow night?
No, there's nothing available.
Okay. All right, thank you. We're not used to having this, such an unavailability. And, trying to stay upbeat about it,
But there is stoicism here. Eula will celebrate her 95th birthday on Sunday.
Listen, I went through the Depression. I went through all the wars. I can get through this.
It is the same story across this huge state. Arctic conditions have brought Texas to a halt. This is the Texan town of Euless, and just around here, 10,000 households woke up with no electricity and no heating. They were told to keep the shutters closed to keep the heat in, and as you can see, the roads are very, very quiet. Now, the electricity has returned sporadically, but any optimism has been tempered by the knowledge that another snowstorm is forecast to arrive in the coming hours. Texas has wealth and resources, but it is struggling to cope with the crisis, and nobody knows if there's worse to come. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Tarrant County, Texas.
England's Children's Commissioner has called on the government to put children at the centre of the PM's plan to build back better once the COVID-19 pandemic is under control. Anne Longfield joins us once again on the programme. And great to have you on what is, of course, the beginning of the end for you is in your time as Children's Commissioner. Not something we are celebrating here on the programme. You've been great and always available to come on and talk to us. I do wonder, though, once again, when you're speaking today, at the heart of your approach, it's identifying those disadvantaged children and the problems that they are experiencing, perhaps more than any of us, thanks to COVID-19.
Yes, that's right, and great to be on again. What I've been trying to do tirelessly over the last 6 years is just set out how children experience life differently if they have huge vulnerabilities in their life. If they're living in poverty, if they're behind school before they even start, if they've got special educational needs, because the experience of that is something that is difficult for people to understand often that are making the decisions. So there's been an awful lot of children that have entered the pandemic not having the resources to draw on that other children have. It's been a difficult year for everyone, but for those children, it's been particularly tough. So there's two parts of the Build Back Better that I'm asking the PM to put children at the heart of. One is building back for all children, but the other part is the better. For those kids who weren't getting their fair share of support in the first instance, for those kids who were struggling, I think we can do better for them. And that's something that will help them, but the country as a whole.
I suppose if we were to pick a theme that has run through, a thread that has run through all the conversations that you and I have had over the past few months, it has always been that COVID-19 has not created these problems that you've identified. It has exacerbated problems that predate the pandemic.
Yeah, that's right. It's exacerbated them, and it's shone this huge, stark spotlight on the different experiences that children have growing up. So, of course, for families where parents were able to work at home with a large house and garden, with lots of resources to draw on, and Zoom lessons at the same time, that's one experience of lockdown. But for those kids that parents couldn't stay at home, they needed to go out to work, they maybe don't have the tech there, they're in cramped accommodation, and there's already things going on in the household that make it difficult, possibly domestic violence and the like, then it's just a completely contrasting experience. And of course, whilst the pandemic has been awful for all kids, for those kids, it's really amplified that gap. And what we've seen is the disadvantage gap growing and the education gap growing, which we already knew was quite substantial. So the need really not only to help all children get back on their feet, but really help boost these children who are already behind is enormous.
We've learnt over the past 24 hours, and that the algorithm that the government is using to determine who is most at risk from COVID-19 has been altered. Now includes, of course, ethnicity, but also deprivation. I mean, on that topic, we are yet to hear from the government whether or not that universal credit uplift is going to last in the longer term. What do you make of that, given that we now understand deprivation? There is now an empirical basis on which we can say deprivation is contributing to the COVID crisis.
Well, the uplift in universal credit has been really important for families. It's played such a part in families being able to get by over these recent months. But they're still in the pandemic. They haven't been able to return to work. They haven't been able to get their incomes up. So now is not the time, in my view, to take away that level of support. It's something which I think goes to the heart of understanding what families do need during this period, and also families need for their children. And if we're really committed to helping families help their own children flourish, we can't even consider taking away that uplift at the moment.
It is, as I mentioned, your last speech as Children's Commissioner. I don't know if it's kind of a last day of term thing in the office this morning, whether you brought the games in, the cakes and all the rest. I do wonder, however, if I might tempt you into just a little bit of candour about what it has been like when you have sat down with ministers, what it has been like when you've sat down with civil service in Whitehall, and you've laid out, as you so often have on this programme, the problems that our young people are facing. Do they understand what is going on?
Well, look, government's a huge institution full of a lot of really well-meaning people and a lot of talented people. And I do seriously believe that most people coming to public life wanted to do good and would want to see the best for children. But they get lost. They get lost in the processes and the data, and the fact that government departments look at the institutions that are connected with children rather than the children themselves. So for me, really being able to put children at the forefront, and we've seen President Biden doing it with his huge investment, and we've seen it in New Zealand too, is about thinking about how government needs to reshape itself so it can understand children's lives and it can actually get the policies in place that people know will make a difference. That's the challenge, and it's also the opportunity.
Last question. Do you like Boris Johnson?
I think he's really personable. I think one thing that I'm talking about in the speech is actually regaining that sense of confidence and outward looking confidence that we had of a nation during the Olympics. That's something that I think we need to get back to and see. And that's something which I think is part about getting on the front foot and enabling all children to play their part in the nation's progress. At the moment, we're looking at about a fifth of children who won't be able to do that. And that's a loss for everyone. So I say, I think that we need, as a country, to have that confidence. And the PM has that opportunity to do it in terms of children.
Nicely sidestepped, Anne. Nicely sidestepped. Game recognised game. Anne Longfield, it's always been good to have you on the show in your role. And so all the best for what comes next. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Time for us to have a look at the weather.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello there, good morning to you. Well, it is mild, but it is rather unsettled, and that's very much the picture that we're looking at this week. We've got an area of rain working its way eastwards across the country today. It's going to hang around over southernmost counties and then pep up again this evening. It's also going to be very windy over western parts of Scotland. So really, we're starting with a bit of a mishmash. Here's our rain spreading its way eastwards. You can see temperatures already around 7 or 8 degrees Celsius, so frost-free to start the day. Quite breezy, though, and those winds are going to gust to around 60 or 70 miles per hour over western parts of Scotland, perhaps even more than that over the Hebrides. Best of the weather through these central areas. Here we'll see some sunshine. It'll stay mostly dry. Temperatures 10 or 11 degrees Celsius. That's 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Showers into northern and western parts, and then that rain stalling over parts of East Anglia and the southeast. It peps up over parts of Wales tonight, makes its way northwards, and we start Thursday very much the same way as we start today, rain in the north and the west.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.